Hello, my name is Maria Eckstein from UC Berkeley, and I will talk to you about a project where we try to understand the development of learning. In the last couple of decades, the cognitive neurosciences have made major breakthroughs in computational modeling and shown us how crucial reinforcement learning is to human learning and behavior. Strikingly, reinforcement learning does not only underlie simple stimulus outcome and stimulus response learning, like most of it knows in Skinner and Watson. Instead, RL can explain far-reaching, goal-directed behavior with complex temporal structure, and is even thought to be at the heart of complex, abstract thinking that requires mental models with hierarchical structure. And the current boom in machine learning and AI has provided us with powerful algorithms and strong mathematical theory to transfer to cognitive modeling. The question we wanted to answer in our research is, how does the ability to do RL develop? How do humans learn to RL, and what guides the development of this ability? Before we can answer this question, let's briefly look at how RL exactly works. Basically, we have an agent, in our case a child, who interacts with an environment, in our case a task. The child takes an action A, say a button press, and receives a reward R, say a gold coin. What happens now, according to RL, is that the child updates her expectations about how good action A was, based on the outcome. Because she received a reward, she's positively surprised and increases the value of her action. In RL jargon, she experienced a positive reward prediction error. How much the child increases the action value depends on her individual learning rate. A large learning rate leads to fast adaptation and great flexibility. A small learning rate leads to slow learning and less flexibility, but is more stable. Many cognitive models differentiate between positive and negative learning rates because learners often learn differently from positive and negative outcomes. In this case, positive learning rates determine how fast a child learns from positive outcomes, and negative learning rates determine how fast she learns from negative outcomes. After updating action values, the learner is ready to choose the next action. This step is simple. The child translates her action values into action probabilities using a so-called softmax function. She then chooses one action according to these probabilities. The translation of action values into probabilities is controlled by parameter beta, the so-called decision temperature. A high decision temperature will choose actions of any value, whereas a low decision temperature will focus on just the highest valued actions. An important thing to note here is that in RL, learning, so updating action values, and decision-making, so choosing actions, are two separate steps, and each is controlled by its own parameter. This means that even when learning is perfect, decisions can still be bad. In other words, RL models take into account that we can't observe directly what a learner knows. We can only observe what actions he or she chooses. By using RL models, we can reveal both aspects, learning as well as choice. One of the major findings in RL was that the key parts of our RL algorithms seem to map almost one-to-one to specific neural structures in the mammalian brain. For example, we have all seen the striking correlations between DA firing rate in the midbrain and reward prediction errors calculated using RL. So what you see here is time on the x-axis and dopamine firing rate on the y-axis, and the dark line is a trial in which an animal got a big reward and experiences a big reward prediction error, which leads to a big spike in dopamine firing. And the light gray line is a trial in which an animal received a small reward leading to a small reward prediction error and a small spike in dopamine firing. Interestingly, key areas of RL are still developing throughout the teen years, and many hope that computational models can shed light on this process. So back to our original question. Of course, we were not the first to ask how learning develops, and we've seen a large number of developmental computational studies in the last decade or so. Probably the most consistent finding in all these studies is that children have the tendency to explore, whereas adults have the tendency to exploit. The idea here is that childhood provides a protected phase of life to engage with the world and learn as much as possible without pressure to support oneself yet. Adults, on the other hand, exploit what they already know to maximize goals. In the RL literature, the most common way to model this transition is through the decision temperature beta. High decision temperature means lots of exploration, and study after study has found that decision temperatures decrease through development. And with the developmental increase in exploitation, many studies also find an increase in performance. In addition, development from childhood to adulthood is not strictly linear, and adolescence plays a unique role in many ways, risk-taking being the most famous one. So the literature is quite consistent in terms of exploration, exploitation, and overall performance, that is, in terms of the choice step of reinforcement learning. But it is just as inconsistent in terms of learning, that is the updating step. There almost are as many studies that have shown developmental increases in learning rates as there are studies that have shown decreases. We recently found a prominent U shape, and others have reported no change at all. Why is this happening? Why do almost all studies report the same changes in decision temperatures, but changes in learning rates are so inconsistent? Does that mean that all computational models are useless? Of course not. The story is just more complicated. So here's one possible explanation. There might be one coherent brain system that regulates action choice. As this brain system develops, decision temperatures drop across tasks to move us from exploration to exploitation. Learning, on the other hand, is regulated by multiple systems: reinforcement learning, working memory, episodic memory, and so on. And because different learning tasks tap into different learning systems, and each matures at a different schedule, we see different trajectories in each task. For example, stochastic tasks might be more likely to engage RL, whereas deterministic tasks might engage more working memory. Stable and volatile tasks fundamentally differ from each other because optimal performance needs small learning rates in stable tasks but large learning rate in volatile tasks. Almost certainly, these correspond to different learning systems. Lastly, the number of stimuli to learn about makes a difference. We can hold a small number of stimuli in working memory, but when working memory capacity is exceeded, we need to engage other systems. In other words, it might be the case that there is one unified system for action choice, but multiple systems for learning. To find out if this is true, we would need to test the same participants on different tasks across this spectrum of different environments. So this is exactly what we did. We chose 4 tasks that vary in 2 common dimensions and gave it to almost 300 participants across a wide age range. We also measured pubertal development because the brain changes of puberty onset could drive developmental differences. We then fit our L models to our task and really made sure the models were capturing our participants' behavior well. We compared a lot of competing models with different sets of parameters, used hierarchical Bayesian model fitting whenever possible, and validated the models to make sure all parameters were identifiable and that the models captured all age differences of the human population. Here on the right, I'm showing our participant sample. You see that we have a balance between females and males, and all ages are represented equally. Here are 4 tasks. The 2 on the left have deterministic feedback, while the 2 on the right have stochastic feedback. And the 2 on top have several contexts, the stable contingencies, while the 2 at the bottom have a single context with volatile contingencies. Stable contingencies just means that the correct response never changes, and volatile means that the correct response can change. So let me explain each task a little more. The stable deterministic task is the RLWM task that some of you might be familiar with. Participants see a stimulus like the bee here and choose one of 3 actions, left, up, or right. Participants deterministically get a reward for each correct action and no reward for each incorrect action. The clue of this task is that stimuli appear in blocks of different sizes. The bee can appear in a block containing just 1 other animal or up to 5 other animals. Of course, the task becomes more difficult as the set size gets bigger, and this is because we shift from using our reliable working memory to having to use our less reliable reinforcement learning system. In the stable stochastic task, participants see 1 of 4 butterflies on each trial and then need to pick 1 of 2 flowers, guessing which one the butterfly likes more. Each butterfly has a stable preference for 1 flower, and participants get a stochastic reward with 80% probability when they choose the right flower. Nevertheless, sometimes the butterfly likes the opposite flower, and participants get a reward with 20% probability when they choose the incorrect flower. We unfortunately had to exclude the volatile deterministic task because too many participants didn't reach criterion performance. In the volatile stochastic tasks, participants see 2 boxes and can open 1 on each trial with the goal of collecting gold coins. For some period of time, one box is correct and leads to a stochastic reward, while the other is unrewarded. Then the contingencies switch and the opposite box is correct, and this pattern repeats several times, making the task volatile. We previously found that adolescents severely outperform children and even young adults on this task, suggesting that adolescent brains are specifically adapted for stochastic and volatile environments. So what did we find? We found the same consistent patterns of decreasing response times and decreasing decision temperatures as previous studies. And plotting the age on the x-axis here. On the left, you see that z-scored RTs decrease smoothly and consistently in all 3 tasks with basically identical trajectories. On the right, you see a consistent decrease in decision temperatures across all tasks with small differences between tasks. Accuracy increases very consistently in the RLWM and 4 butterfly task with basically identical trajectories. But like I mentioned before, in the 2 boxes task, the peak is during adolescence. Altogether, all of these patterns are consistent with the previous literature. We even highlight some special role for puberty. So how about the parameters that used to be contradictory? Do the same participants really show different learning rates in different tasks? This is exactly what you find. In the same participants, our positive learning rates increase in 2 tasks, but show no change in the third. And our negative learning rates are all over the place, stable for 4 butterfly, U-shaped for 2 boxes, and increasing for RLWM. So this is great news. We replicated both the consistency in choice parameters and the inconsistency in learning parameters. And because all of this is in the same participants, we know that the inconsistencies are not caused by differences in samples or labs. The same participants can literally show different learning rates in different tasks. And because we have the same measures in all participants, we can now quantify how similar or different they really are. So this is what we did next. You've seen that RTs are very similar across tasks because they all drop in the same way. So of course, we can predict RTs from participants' age, and we can also predict RTs in one task from another because they both can be predicted by age. But we wanted to know how similar are RTs after controlling for age. So the first thing we had to do was to clean RTs of age. We did this by regressing RTs against age. The RT residuals now reflect individual differences in RTs after removing the effect of age. When we compare the RT residuals of the 2 stochastic tasks, butterfly and boxes, they're still quite correlated here on the very left. Even though we can predict RTs really well from age alone, we can predict them even better when we also know the RTs of the other tasks. The same is true for the 2 stable tasks, RWM and butterfly here in the middle, and even for the 2 tasks that share nothing in common on the right. What this means is that RTs come from stable individual differences that affect all 3 tasks in the same way. RT differences do not just emerge at the population level. When we average everyone together, they reveal individual marker. This would be in accordance with a single underlying brain system. The pattern for accuracy is slightly different. Here, the residuals are only correlated between similar tasks on the left and in the middle here. In other words, knowing the accuracy of a participant in one task tells us something about their accuracy in a similar task, but it doesn't tell us anything about a very different task. Now for decision temperature. Interestingly, decision temperature is consistent between the 2 stochastic tasks, but it is not consistent between a stochastic and the deterministic task. That means that we can predict the decision temperature in the deterministic task best when we know somebody's age. Knowing their accuracy in a stochastic task does not help at all. But when we know somebody's accuracy in one of the stochastic tasks, we can predict the other even better than from age alone. Taken together, we see that RTs are very consistent between tasks, and that accuracy and decision temperature are slightly less consistent. All of them have strong and consistent age effects. By testing the same participants, we can really zoom in on the differences. So what happened to our learning parameters? All of our positive learning rates go up or are stable, but it turns out there's no consistency between them across tasks. If you don't remove the effect of age, we can happily predict one task from another, but after controlling for age, there's no information left. And the same is true for negative learning rates. This suggests that learning parameters really capture different aspects across different tasks. In summary, we see that RTs are very consistent. Knowing somebody's age already tells us a lot about their RTs, but knowing their RTs in different tasks tells us even more. Performance and decision temperature are less consistent in RTs, but they still transfer between similar tasks. Learning rates are completely inconsistent, and we are no better than chance when we try to guess one after knowing another. Why is this happening? Different tasks might recruit different learning systems from each other, but they all get picked up by the same learning rate parameter. In other words, context is crucial for learning. The answer might not be as simple as learning rates increase during development, or even learning rates for positive feedback develop in this way, and learning rates for negative feedback develop in a different way. The context shapes which of many learning systems we use, and each may develop a little differently. The next question is, of course, which learning systems did each of our tasks recruit? To get at this, we looked at what behaviors each learning rate parameter captured, but I need to refer you to our preprint for details. So what have you learned from this study? Many aspects of cognition change during development, and one task is never enough to capture all of them. We were hoping that by using 4 different tasks, we could shed some light on the most important developments and potentially explain inconsistencies between previous studies. We indeed replicated previous studies and saw consistent changes in RTs and choice parameters across all tasks. But at the same time, learning parameters differed widely even within the same participants. We think this means that a single brain system might underlie choice, but several systems underlie learning. Our 2 contextual memory-heavy tasks engaged more working memory, and our 2 volatile tasks engaged more strategizing about staying versus switching. Taking a step back, it is fundamentally difficult to assess learning because we never know what somebody knows, so what they have learned. We only see how they respond, their choice. Our L modeling can be really helpful here because it disentangles learning and choice. And what we see is that choice shows a quite consistent developmental trajectory, whereas learning depends much more on the specific context. This suggests that different neurocognitive systems are developing in parallel. They're recruited differently in different environments, they develop with different trajectories, and not all systems are peaking in adulthood. And multiple systems end up contributing to the same learning rate parameter alpha. With this, I would like to thank all my collaborators. Many people of the CCN lab were involved, especially undergrad RAs, and this picture only shows a small subset. Anne Collins, Linda Wilbrecht, and Ron Dahl were the PIs on this project, and I couldn't be more thankful for the input and feedback. We also thank the NSF for funding of the SOCN grant. And thank you for listening.